Hello, hello, and welcome to this edition of the Law Firm Blueprint. I'm one of your hosts, Jay Ruane, and with me, as always, back there in the resort. I don't know where he is, but it's certainly not in the Blue Shark and Price Benowitz headquarters. It's my man, Seth Price, but we are joined today by another in our Summer of Seth, or in the It Depends podcast, whatever you want to call us. We're talking to coaches all across the country, and we have a great one with us today. The owner, operator, CEO of law firm Alchemy, and our friend Charley Mann. Charley, thank you so much for being with us. We are so happy that we get to spend some time with you today.
I am absolutely thrilled. I mean, Jay, I had mentioned this to you earlier that I've been watching what you do from afar and so been looking forward. Like when Seth opened up this invitation, I was like, yeah, awesome, cool. I get to talk with Seth. But really, I'm excited to really talk with Jay, finally meet him. I'm lucky enough that Seth and I have had the opportunity to chat a lot over the last several years, and he's been a good friend and mentor over that time. And now I get to worm my way into Jay's world as well.
Yeah, well, it's going to be awesome. I mean, my reality is, I really haven't traveled much since COVID hit. As you know, I got locked down like the rest of us. But then, as my kids aged up, part of my why I do my business my way is so I can spend more time at home. I don't mind traveling, but I want to spend the last 5 years and the next five being more present at home. And so that's why I built my business that way. So it's great because I didn't get to run into you at a seminar. I get to run into you right here today. So thank you for being with us. But Seth is the one who starts these questions off. So let's throw to Seth and see what he wants to pepper
as
you
you know, kind of a life moment. Through COVID, we did this from the Tiki Hut. And while Tiki Huts in the Maryland snow belt are not quite the same as the Tiki Hut in Florida, it is now a backyard oasis. So figured I'd do the show today from there.
Seth, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to challenge you. Take off the shirt and get in the hot tub that's behind you. And let's do it live from the hot tub. That's a much, much better thing.
I think that our viewership would go way down.
I think at the end of the show, you just gotta go and launch yourself and jump in.
You get like sponsored by Ozempic and so.
All right, so what do you got for Seth?
Charley, great to have you here. Look, I felt like one of the positives of COVID is that I got to sort of got to network with people I otherwise would not have gotten to spend time with. It was really during that time got to know you. I needed a passport, but went across the bridge to Virginia and got to break bread. But one of the things I think that's unique, like I've loved watching what you're building from afar, but I think to a lot of us, Jay and I sit here and the podcast is all about law firm growth, but a lot of the stuff we're dealing with is we've built legacy systems, some of them good, some bad, some drama, some muck, and we're always trying to fix and then build. And you have a unique opportunity, if nothing else, where you were within the belly of the beast of one of the larger or legacy coaching organizations for a better part of a decade, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, this is my own show. And what do you do when it's sort of like, hey, you've seen what's out there. You now nobody's telling you what to do, or you don't have to listen to anybody else. You could sort of go your own way. Talk to us a little bit about how you go about setting up this system, which has been getting really rave reviews in the legal community.
One of the most important things I've taken with me that I've seen, because I've had the opportunity to learn from so many folks who are farther down the journey than I am. And I think the one thing that hopefully I've been smart enough to do is to be dumb enough to trust the advice of those who have more experience than me and try and implement it a little bit earlier. And that goes with a big theme that I like to talk about, which is not being absolutist in thinking. I find a lot of times folks are really absolutist in that it has to be done this very specific way. And what you end up seeing is over time, a business gets built on these competing absolutes because the absolutes keep changing over time rather than from the beginning saying, I'm running an evolving business that will be different every step of the way. And I can prepare for adaptation early on. And I can start thinking about, when's an appropriate reinvestment cycle? When do I really need to hammer home on profit coming out so that way there are reserves in my personal life that make running the business really fun? And then when is it the time to put the pedal to the metal? What are the types of people that you should be hiring? It's funny, I was listening to, I think you guys were talking with John Fisher recently, and you were talking about scaling. I really appreciate the conversations you guys were having about this, because you were saying, It's not possible in a gigantic organization, for example, to have all A players, right? You are going to have some people who do the job. They need to do it within the structure, the system, the KPIs that are assigned to them, but maybe not everyone is going to elevate the game to the next level. You have your role players. I think about, okay, if I'm advising a firm owner who has a mid six-figure business, I'm going to tell them, hey, right now, you probably do want to focus on a few key players who are excellent and wear multiple hats in the business. But I also know that as the business gets near $1 million, we're going to need more specialists in the business. And I need to have that conversation now with my team members to say, look, over time, what you're going to see is I'm going to take responsibilities away from you. It's not because you're bad at the job. It's because we're getting better as a business and you're going to become more valuable in the process. So my hope is I'm going to take all of these systems and strategies that I've seen up close that often compete with each other and evolve the business rather than try and drive from one absolute to the next.
I want to follow up with that, Seth, because
Yeah.
something just jumps out at me. That's a really delicate conversation to have with employees who are not entrepreneurs and don't have that sort of entrepreneurial drive, because a lot of times employees, if they see that their task list of 10 is now 7 or 5 because you've brought on somebody else who's going to handle that stuff, they start to get nervous. I'm going through this right now. I have somebody who's been with me for 24 years, and she's like, wait, you're taking away stuff? I'm like, yeah, but that's okay, because now we have somebody who's just doing this across 6 different pods, and she's freaking out and she's throwing up barriers, and we had to have a conversation about that. It's a really, and for introverted lawyers who don't like one-on-ones, that's tough to navigate, isn't it?
And I'll throw the 2 words that I hear. It's not the way it used to be, or it wasn't what I was hired for. How do you navigate those 2 elements, to Jay's point?
Probably the best thing that happens is early on, you've established a culture of we are evolving, right? Like you've had that early on. Jay, you're talking about a 24-year team member. If I were a betting man, I would place my chips on that conversation wasn't happening 24 years ago, right?
Right.
So because I have some of this experience, and again, I'm listening to people, seeing what's going on, trying to track the patterns and trying to stay ahead. Now, first to admit, I will be imperfect at it. I will absolutely flub this at times. I'll make a hire that I'm trying to make really fast. We'll skip that part of the training, and then we have problems 2 years later, right? It's going to happen. But as best as possible, early on, can I work with people and ingrain them with this idea to improve the odds? Because that's the other thing that I'll say is, I tell this to my coaching clients openly. I'm not going to be right 100% of the time. That's actually, it's a fallacy to think that anyone's right 100% of the time, especially in coaching. What I want to do is improve our odds on anything by looking at the patterns and saying, can we get ahead of this? Can we make higher percentage outcome choices? So if the person ends up having that type of, you hear about, the fixed and growth mindset, if they really have a fixed mindset, they could hear me say early on, this is going to evolve, and intellectually, they will understand that and they will hear the words. But perhaps when the rubber meets the road, the intersection of what we've talked about and who they are at their core may ultimately come into conflict, and there's no resolving that. I'll just have to find a way to move on to the next team member. The hope is, though, I've taken someone who's in the middle on that fixed and growth mindset and hopefully push them 10, 15, 20% farther into the growth mindset space so they'll be ready for that moment.
And one of the things, we just had Tim from Vista on, right, who does a great job with, higher end PI shops, and coming in doing 360s, but resources needed on that are no joke. Hiring yourself and team members to fly into a city and sit down, when you're looking at firms, many of which are trying to go from 0 to 1 million, and then, hopefully from 1 million, 1.5 million, and then beyond.
Yeah.
There is balance. They talk, Tim was talking a lot about like no one size fits all, that everything is custom. Is it, when you're dealing with these groups, and I see it a lot through the John Fisher Mastermind. We see a lot of people that are sort of smaller coming up as well as the larger guys, but the smaller guys, the themes are so central. Getting a non-lawyer in place, putting some systems. As you go through this, how do you balance? Because if you did everything custom for each firm, they probably couldn't afford it. And you want to be able to do one size fits all within reason, because that makes it much more affordable and attainable for people to use. How do you balance that? You would love to be a personal trainer to each, and you probably have elements of that, while at the same time, the only way to really do this in an economical way is to bring people together in some sort of systematic way.
I love that question because it's something I'm always working toward. And the phrase, and if a coaching client is listening to this, they're going to be like, oh yeah, I've heard this phrase before. We talk about minimum viable stimulus, which is, can we reduce this back to just the one core element that is necessary to make it work? So let me give an example. Working with a coaching client right now who he's taken several different marketing approaches where he's tried to focus on this specific referral outreach. He's tried to publish on LinkedIn, and everything after about 5 days, honestly, he has a hard time going any farther with it. So we've reduced it down to minimum viable stimulus of do one marketing action per day. I don't care if it's a mass broadcast. I don't care if it's reaching out to an individual, if it's sending a text message, if it's putting a handwritten card in the mail. Do one marketing thing per day, and let's start from there and then figure out what actually connects with you. Now, hopefully, as we get people to take that minimum viable stimulus, now we can send them down a more precise path as they figure out what works with them. Like if they go, man, I love being on LinkedIn. Okay, great. Go grab Justin Welsh's course and learn how to be awesome on LinkedIn. Or they go, man, I love sending emails. Great. Let's have you be someone who publishes 2 emails per week rather than what I ask them to do normally, which is 1 email per week, because you love copywriting, you're good at copywriting, and you're getting people responding saying, hey, we need to sit down, or hey, I've got someone to refer to you. And that's good for business. So let's zip back to minimum viable stimulus, and then we can send you down the path that best fits you. Because you're right, Seth, at the end of the day, it's got to be about what you want to do. And this, in the coaching or information space, that absolutism of you have to follow this one exact program. You have to, if you're not doing it exactly this way, saying these exact words, it's all going to fall apart. I mean, how many people have gone through a sales training and they've learned the script, but still can't sell because they don't really understand why they're saying it or what they're really saying, and they don't understand the principles behind all of it.
Oh, Seth, you're muted. He does this when he's outside.
I did it outside. This is a new construction going on behind us. Hopefully it's not terrible. But I'll go down that rabbit hole because to me, one of those areas, again, we're going down one of many, but in sales, it's one I still struggle with how to scale, because while there are amazing sales organizations out there, like Sandler and others that are great, bring it to a law firm, people shut off. And even in the personal injury space, there's some great thought leaders like Gary Falkowitz, friend of the show, can give you some great stuff. But when you go to the fee for service side, which is majority of the world that you may be touching, you're looking at this, and there's nobody out there that has raised their hand to say, hey, this is the mindset. Here are the script. Here are the best practices. And it's like you're having every lawyer out there at some level has to figure that out themselves, which is pretty brutal.
Oh, 100%. And I would say some of that comes from a core idea of how many law firms are named after the partner or partners, right? Price Benowitz. And there's a way that you started to develop to sell within the practice. And it's very hard for you to become, say, a professional sales trainer within your own organization. Look at that, enjoying a beautiful drink out at the
table. Yeah, well, Charlie, the two of us are still working today.
And so trying to become a professional sales trainer, that's hard, but there's no professional, there are few, we should say, professional sales trainers out there working with the law firms, working with these fees. And then when someone comes in, a lot of times you have this issue of the way that the managing partner or the owner would like to see sales happen. It causes friction with maybe the Sandler selling system. And there's not this opportunity to come together and say, how do we merge these things? So like when I'm working with a client, my favorite exercise to have them do is wherever it is that you have your consultation room, wherever you're doing your selling, it could be on Zoom, it could be in person. When you come out of it, can you take a 3x5 index card and just write down a couple of things that went right for you during that? And if we build up enough of those index cards over time, you're going to have this stack of wisdom that at least is a starting point for every attorney who has to walk into one of those consultation rooms. And it gives them, if we can just develop a few little heuristics, because they look at that clever phrase that Seth or Jay used, that question that they knew to ask, And then over time, as they get exposure maybe to a Sandler selling or to some Chet Holmes material, they're starting to match the principles that they hear over there with the materials that you've developed. And now we have a more endemic to your firm sales system.
Absolutely. I've never heard somebody phrase it that way. That's brilliant. Jay?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we did, Charlie, is I got on the phone, we recorded it, and I sold to 3 of my lawyers. They pretended to be the client, and I walked them through how I would have done an intake, and then I played that. And my intake people and my sales lawyer are still using some of the things that we talk about. How, most lawyers focus on 2 areas. We use 3 because people like 3s. We want the right result, not the rushed result, using some things. And that I think has really helped. And we've recently gone really deep into Paul Riley's value-added selling to determine the difference between wants and needs. With a want, you're willing to spend $8 for that coffee from Starbucks, and you'll drive, and when you need lettuce, you'll drive an extra 5 miles for the cheaper lettuce because you need that. You don't want lettuce, right? And so right. You have to separate the wants from the needs. And a lot of people, unfortunately, if it's a family law case and they've been served, if they've been arrested, if they're dealing with an injury, people are, they know they need a lawyer, and they want to scratch that itch. They don't want to make it a want where they want to spend extra money. And so as fee for service, we want to get them, you may want a lawyer, but you may need a lawyer, but you want us, and we can charge a premium for whatever representation that we're doing.
Oh my gosh, it's such a good way to put it. And what I would suggest is everyone, in terms of farthering this idea that Jay has here, with your own team, work with them to understand how they buy and expose the fallacies that they articulate about how they buy. Because the first thing that people will say is, well, I'm a very rational buyer. No, you're not. And here's my proof that you're not a rational buyer. The statement that you say, I'm a rational buyer, is a statement of superiority, which is an emotional state to be in. So you're already choosing to take a level of superiority by being a rational buyer, and that will influence your decision. You can't make decisions without emotion. Literally, there's the research showing you cannot make a decision without an emotive part behind it. So let's help them see the truth behind how they buy, because that will get them more comfortable. Hopefully, again, moving our odds, our percentages better. That will get them more comfortable with the idea of wants rather than needs.
I had a life moment in business that I thought a lot about Charlie with, and I think would be illustrative to our audience. But this morning, we've built up this insane intake group. Post-COVID, pre-COVID, 12 people in our office, post-COVID, 25 around the world, around the country, being run by this rock star. And there's an incentive system where they get points on the call based on a whole bunch of things. And realize that in the personal injury space, there were 1 or 2 places that we were incentivizing not the way you would want as a business owner. Like I looked at it, I'm like, man, I missed the boat on this, in the sense that you were getting a point for empathy, you're getting a point for getting the name spelled correctly, but you were getting 1 point for getting the person to sign while you're still on the phone, which is really the most.
That's 10 points.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? And if you gave legal advice, which is obviously a third rail as a non-lawyer,
lose 10 points.
Exactly. Rather than lose 1 point. And the point was, part of it is exactly that, is that we need, if we figure out what we want, and this wasn't money, this was literally just points on a grading scale. Forget about anything else. But it's like having thought, and this is happening at my own firm with as good an intake director as you're ever going to see in the history of a firm. You're sitting there, and then if you don't incentivize properly or show praise properly, that it can lead to unintended. It's true with salespeople, right? If you incentivize something, people will go in that direction. And you like it's one of those light bulb moments where I'm like, if you incentivize in a particular direction, it's going there and making sure that I set it and forget it, rather than continuously adjusting. But Jay, both of those things you said were exactly my reaction when I saw them.
So what you've just said completely triggered a concept that is so well related to this, which I talk about with clients all the time, which is diagnosing process versus outcome. And are we measuring the process? Are we measuring the outcome? And in the past, this is something that I learned, I would get very absolutist, like, oh, in that position, we should only measure the process. In that position, you should only measure the outcome. And I realized pretty much in every position, you're going to measure part of the process and you're measuring the outcome side by side. Because we all want to say, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, I just want the outcome. I want you to sign the client. That's really all that I want. But if we want to do that with consistency over a well-scaled and scaling firm, there needs to be a process that allows for a degree of consistency that is worth measuring. And then if you do have it where 10 points is for the sign up, and you have that one person who comes in who shows absolutely no empathy whatsoever, but apparently gets people to sign, you're like, whatever. You're great at getting people to sign. You are not negatively affecting the long-term relationship with the client. That just seems to be your method. Great. We really want that outcome. But for most people, they need to follow the process in order to achieve the outcome.
Well, and I think that's also the difference. When you start, you get the person. A friend of the show emailed me the other day. I got some lady. I think she's perfect for me. She came out of a school. She's going to work with me side by side. He sent it to one of those recruiting coaches who's amazing, who says, don't hire. And I'm like, look, sometimes you need that multitask person that may not fit into the right boxes. Person may not get there once you're at the larger size, but
right.
Can you get, as you scale, and that's what I think makes the intake global situation that we have great, is that you do need to make sure that people are rowing in the same direction. You'd love to, but you also want to make sure that if somebody is closing, but they have a lower score on one or two other things, that you're not closing it off, that you're so process oriented that you forget about the results.
It turns out that being a mature adult and business owner means you have to have balance in the way that you handle these things.
But it's harder when you delegate, because balance, now you're expecting somebody who's amazing to balance. And you know what? They have 25 people to deal with. Balance is not really what you want. You want to be able to go with zeros and ones, and you may lose a rock star in there. I hope we don't, but that you want to be able to, but it's, if you can adjust it so that it allows somebody who is less empathetic but gets the job done. The reason you want the empathy is to get the signature, not that you don't want people empathetic in general. You don't want to be a counter to it. But if somebody is non-empathetic, they're not obnoxious, but they get it done, can you make sure that you're giving a little bit of leeway? And I think it also depends on when you're asking for money. There's a different calculus from when you're asking for a signature.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the money conversation in family law and DUI criminal defense is so much different than the intake process in a personal injury. They're almost two different industries. I mean, just because there's psychological things that you have to consider, there's obviously budgetary concerns and that type of thing. But Charlie, I want to ask you something before we go too long into this, because I think it's something that our audience can learn from. You've been in this space for a while, but law firm Alchemy really is a new entity that you are building at the same time you're helping lawyers build their firm. And one of the great things about that, I think, is that you're able to see and be intentional about your own growth, when sometimes lawyers, they put on the blinders and they're like, well, I'm going to keep going in this direction. And you got to say, wait, you got to hit the core fundamentals first. So let's talk a little bit about that. Are you seeing, crossover, corollaries, whatever you want to call it, to growing your own business and helping lawyers who are saying, well, I already know everything I need to know. Just tell me what to do and I'll get there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm copying the same playbook that I'm giving to coaching clients. Like, let's talk about referrals, for example. The referral playbook that I lay down for any coaching client is, in the very fast version, is you should be doing a weekly email, you should be doing a monthly print mailer, you should be doing 2 in-person, ideally, meetups per week, especially if you're a younger firm. A lot of nuance that goes into it. We don't have time for all of that. What am I doing in my own business? I'm doing meetups every single week, mostly via Zoom because of the way that my business is organized. I send a monthly print newsletter out free to a large list, hundreds of folks.
I get it. I read it every time I get it.
I love it.
I'm not sure I'm getting my print one.
We'll make sure you get it, Seth, because
I appreciate that.
Because I will tell you,
full-side reading. I got to get something.
There you go. I do name drop in there as well. So look for the bold. That's where the names are. And so I'm sending that newsletter. I send even more than 1 email per week. That's the nature, again, of my business and adapting to it. But I'm following that minimum stimulus that I put down for everyone else. revenue per employee metrics that I talk about with law firm owners. I'm using that in my own business almost on a 1-for-1 scale. Yeah, if it's a good principle across multiple businesses, I'm going to follow that principle. Otherwise, I've probably designed a flawed principle. And why am I sharing that with my audience?
Do you think there's something that I've always struggled with? Because I saw the late Stephen Fairley was somebody who did. There are things that may work for you in a B2B business development that are not best practices for a B2C. I mean, there are certain things that overlap no matter what, culture and looking at your metrics and things like that. But that from a marketing point of view, you're doing things that might maybe an outside general counsel in a community would do, because those are very similar and analogous to what you're doing. But that there's a fine line that I see some coaches go down where, hey, this is working for me, it should work for you. And Jay doesn't like the word depends, but it does depend on the practice area you're in and how you attack certain things.
Probably the best analogy there would be, or the best framework would be talking about timing. So the people that I'm dealing with, a lot of the timing is built around the arc of a business day, right? So I'm thinking about that, both what is best within the business day, which is going to say, schedule a discovery call during a business day, because they probably don't want to do that on the weekend. On the other hand, the weekend may be a great time to send an email to them, because most business owners treat their business as their hobby as well. And they're checking their emails on the weekend, and they may be just sitting around and have time to digest what I have sent them, as opposed to sending them an email at 4:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. And there's no way that they're going to read that email and take it seriously. Whereas if I'm emailing to, say, consumers, I would be looking at lunch hour emails. Okay, they're going to go pop in on their personal email during their lunch hour. So as a send time between, say, 11 and noon, or maybe as late as 1 o'clock, is that appropriate in order to capture them? But I also now have to think about, and I know you guys have talked about this stuff, after hours phone answering. That's not something that I may be paying a lot of attention to, but a law firm, I want them paying attention to that.
It's really interesting that you bring that up, because, the original Tiger Tactics book started from a Slack conversation with Ryan McKean, myself, Billy Tarasio, and we would be slacking each other at 9 o'clock on Friday nights. It became we were going back and forth furiously. And it was our Friday night thing. And it was because our week was done, dinner was done. Kids at that point, all little kids, they're all in bed, and now we're sitting up. And now was our chance to do that. And so I love the idea of reaching out at nights and weekends when other scaling business owners might have more opportunity to digest what you're doing. I mean, one of the things, Charlie, that you talk about a lot today, and I know I've seen it in what you sent out to me, is the opportunities that exist offline to really build your business at the early stages. Can you talk to me about why, I don't know, maybe it's me, and I'm sure Seth can speak to this. So many lawyers just want to write a check to digital marketing and be done with it, but they don't want to invest in something that can provide them with so many more dividends. I mean, my best cases, my best referrals, they all came via relationships, not via digital marketing, right? I mean, digital marketing has its place. I'm not going to say that it doesn't, but why not spend your early time on developing a solid referral base, right?
Yeah, and so let's go with the common idea about referrals, which is they're a high margin option, because you're not spending dollars, you're spending time. And look, we can get into referral fees and start parsing all this out, and somehow it all comes out in the wash. But the perception is referrals are a higher margin opportunity for you. Early on, you probably have time. And part of the reason that I know that you have time is because what is known as Parkinson's law, which is a task will fit the amount of time allotted to it. Most law firm owners who are still operating within the law firm as an attorney are actually probably putting a lot of extra work into client files that are really them just kind of looking essentially at an open file, not necessarily working on it. It's why I've worked with family law attorneys who have discounted their own billables, because they realize that that wasn't really 1.2, that was a 0.6 or whatever. And so I know that there's the time available to invest in this. The great part, because I'm very much, Jay, when it comes to marketing, the word I love is and. I want everyone to be an and marketer, not an or, not a but and. It's I'm going to do referrals, and I'm going to test LSAs, and I'm going to invest in SEO. And when the time is right, I'm going to invest in broadcast advertising. I'm going to go for radio. I'm going to go for OTT. Yeah, Seth.
Well, but I'm going to push back a little bit because I love
Okay.
it. That's great. But shouldn't it be a prioritized and
Yes.
where, if you're, some of those things, because we hear OTT great, right? I have yet to find anybody outside of some mega players that have crushed it with OTT, where a lot of money, like sort of like the geofencing of emergency rooms. There's a lot of stuff out there that sounds great, but really
Yeah.
digging down to what is my order of operations, because the and can get you in a lot of trouble by, hey, the referral stuff's what's going to get you to 500,000 and allow you to have the money to hire some staff and do things. And yes, it's sweat equity. Is there a caveat that if you go too much and you can hurt yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate you offering that clarity. Like that's a classic. You're listening for the audience and understanding they're starting to write down and their budget's getting way overloaded with marketing. There is a good order of operations, kind of going back to Jay, the origin of the question you were asking, starting with a lot of that referral marketing is a very smart investment. Seth, you have the 500,000. That's usually the number I'm using as well. That'll get you to that $500,000 mark before we need to start talking and we can talk and in maybe some publishing, some platform publishing. There's a 30-day challenge I often will issue. Can you choose a platform and publish every day on that platform for 30 days straight to see if it's the right platform for you? Another and oftentimes early on would be testing out the LSAs to see if it's right for your market and your practice area. Because sometimes, I'm sure as you all have seen, sometimes it zeroes out in a community and sometimes it's the next $1 million opportunity for you.
100%.
You
No, I mean,
you don't know until you
LSA is
test.
the greatest example. In PI, it almost always works, but in criminal, it's 50-50. And you just don't know if you're one of those markets until you try it.
And it's the until you try phrase. Yeah, and you're right with the phrase until you try. So with the referrals, investing in that offline marketing, getting the coffees, getting the lunches, sending handwritten cards. I have a stack like over here next to my desk, and this one I'll hide the name of who it's going out to. Actually, I'll break a little surprise. Seth, there's currently a card that is about to go in the mail to you. Jay, you'll get one as well.
Cool.
I have pre-stamped, ready to go envelopes next to my desk. I can slip a card to at any moment. I paid my kids to pre-stamp all of my envelopes.
That's awesome.
They can make.
That's great.
Yeah. If it's a fun little task, a little evening thing for them.
I think I could get my 10-year-old to address them.
So I have an almost 7 and soon to be 10-year-old. Admittedly, I'm a little nervous about the handwriting, but it is kind of a cute thing to see that possibly. Or they're really, really worried about what happened to Seth. So
I got my 10-year-olds in the back room. I got rid of my shredding service and bought a commercial shredder. And now my 10-year-old comes in once a week and he's my shredding guy. And
there you go.
I'm paying him. It's going into a Roth IRA for him. So he's a 10-year-old who's maxed out his Roth IRA.
Anger management therapy, you don't need as much. You got to get it all out there.
Absolutely. These are the things that you got to do, right?
Yeah, getting the family involved. It's a lot more fun. Yeah, going down that referral path. Just it's amazing. This card will cost me $2.25, to send out, all things considered. And I've had cards that are worth $10,000 go out the door. I've had text messages worth $20,000 go out through my phone. It's in a world where so much is about at scale. You don't ignore scale, but what you think about is everyone is trying to do everything at scale. Let's go and do some of the unscalable things. I have a client, Andrew Ayers, who talks about how he tries to balance the unscalable with the scalable. And that unscalable has a massive impact if you are consistent about it. The worst thing that happens is someone's like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. Handwritten cards, awesome. They send 3 or 4 of them and think that all their problems will be solved. It's like, no, you probably have to send 100 times that before you start seeing real impact. It might take a year, 2 years, 3 years before the person you sent a handwritten card to ever sends something back to you. But they give up at the beginning because they want that instant gratification and they don't understand frequency. They don't understand consistency and the multiplier, compound interest, whatever term we want to use for it.
Yeah. I mean, I skipped ice cream last night and I didn't lose any weight this morning. You know what I mean? That's the thing. People, and I think now and more people are expecting and wanting the instant gratification. So if you're willing to put in the time on the stuff that doesn't give instant gratification, you're going to stand out to your audience for sure.
Look at a podcast platform. How many under 5 podcast lawyer podcast accounts are there? I'm sure a gazillion.
Yeah, truly. And it is a shame. When I talk with clients, I'm like, look, I want you to win as soon as possible, but there's also part of me that wants you to have to deal with the hard work of it. Because if you let's say you send a referral letter, and I have a lot of folks send out these referral letters to kickstart making connections and lunches. And some of them report back and they're like, I sent out 25 letters and 8 people reached out. And I'm having these lunches and I've gotten referral partnerships. Like, that is fantastic. You still have to follow up with the other 17, just FYI. Like, sorry, let me bring you down back to earth. And we need to send the next batch of 25. And then for the person who, received 1 response, like, you have to stick with it. You now have 24 other people to follow up with, and you still have the playbook stays the exact same because we're playing a long arc here, an odds-based long arc. That's what we want.
Yeah, so many people want instant when you realize we're in this career for 40, 50 years. There's opportunities to go. But Charley, thank you so much. We went a little long today, folks, but it was well worth it. I got some great takeaways. I actually was taking some notes on the side of things that I want to do now based on this conversation. So I'm psyched about this. We got some more time in the day. I'm gonna get to work. You've inspired me, Charley. So thank you so much for being with us here on the Law Firm Blueprint. Folks, that's going to do it for us this week here on the Law Firm Blueprint. Of course, if you want to take us on the go, you can subscribe to the Law Firm Blueprint podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And we're up to, 5 or 6 seasons, hundreds of episodes. We didn't just stop at 5 like some lawyers who get an itch to start a podcast and then give it up. Seth, any final words?
No, thrilled to have Charley here, and can't wait to break bread in person again soon.
Agreed. Gentlemen, thank you so much for the time. And if you're listening to this show, leave a review. As a fellow person who has a podcast, Seth and Jay are putting out some amazing content. They're connecting you with some amazing people. Leave that review. I can promise you they see them, read them, and it makes a difference.
And one of those amazing people is our friend Charley down there. So thank you so much for being with us. Folks, that's going to do it for us. You can always catch us live in our Facebook group, the Law Firm Blueprint, at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific every Thursday, as well as live on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for being with us. Bye for now.